Conscient Podcast, Episode 178. Podium, 2024. What more can we sing and do?
It is taking far too long for us to acknowledge the damage we have done to the world's water and to indigenous people, and to take action. Truth, reconciliation, change. Scientists have discovered that some whale songs actually evolve over time. It is my hope that the choirs who perform this work with me, and all those who hear it, will refuse to let what the whales are saying get lost in the ocean, and will join their song in calling for respect and reciprocity.
Stay humble, keep listening, and keep learning. And that is how we will use choral music as a way to advocate and change the environmental crisis.
So welcome to a special episode of the Conscient Podcast, featuring a bilingual panel that I facilitated called Voicing the Ecological Crisis, What More Can We Sing and Do? It was recorded on Sunday, May 19th, 2024, as part of Podium 2024, the Open Voices, Open Minds Choral Conference and Festival organized by Choral Canada and l'Alliance Chorale du Québec in Tiohtià:ke, on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people, also known as Montreal. So I had the honor of selecting the panelists and moderating this important conversation. You'll hear two of the four presenters. Two of them were in English and are in this episode, and two are in French and will be in episode 157 of Balado Conscient. You will hear Deantha Edmunds and Elise Naccarato. In French, you'll hear Megan Chatran and Sarah Fioravanti. But don't worry, I'll include a transcription of the other presentations in the episode notes so that you can read what was said in the other language. Now, I have to admit that the subject of our conversation on a Sunday afternoon was extremely serious, complex, and I'd say even existential. But I reminded the Assembly that I had promised in the program that we would leave the conversation with a practical reality check while humming with hope. But how does one hum with hope when we are facing imminent societal collapse due to ecological overshoot? I asked the group, and I asked myself, how choral music or collective singing can help. I reminded delegates that the ecological crisis, be it climate change, loss of biodiversity, the ravages of extractive capitalism, and so on, is deepening at a frightening pace, leaving many, including artists, including people listening to this panel, feeling disempowered, demoralized, and sometimes in denial. So when Megan Hila, the executive director of Choral Canada, asked me to help out with this panel, I was very pleased to facilitate conversations about climate change specifically, and how commissioning new works on ecological themes can help, what are some of the strategies to decrease the carbon footprint of choral music activities, and how to engage in more collective political action as a community of artists and singers. Now, I have to say that I admire the leadership of Choral Canada, and I learned a lot from listening to the artistic works at Podium 2024 and the innovative strategies of the participants. The Congress itself was quite fabulous, and it was good to remember that the Canadian choral community has a long history of engagement and foresight with environmental issues. For example, during Podium 2024, Nicholas Fairbank talked about environmental topics in Canadian choral music, and he's developing a list of all the environmental choral pieces. I attended a session by composer Katerina Gimmon, poet Lauren Peet, and conductor Elise Naccarato about their Unsung If the Earth Could Sing project, an environmentally inspired choral cycle, and so on over 3 days. I also heard about choral activities that explore some of the root causes of the ecological crisis, such as colonization and disconnection from nature. For example, on Friday night, May 17th, I attended a groundbreaking concert called Askinonia, Songs of Peace, where one of our panelists, Deantha Edmunds, was a soloist. She'll talk a bit about it in her presentation. Deantha was also soloist on May 18th with her Song of the Whale composition performed by the Holy Heart Chamber Choir of Newfoundland. Now, I was deeply moved by this gorgeous soundscape composition with all the choristers around the church making the most beautiful sounds. And the very end of the composition it moves me just to think about it. Deantha said, "Carry the song on, evolve." Those 5 words stayed with me. Carry the song on, evolve. I also heard some engaging discourse about the intersection of indigenous and non-indigenous musical collaborations, about moving from the colonial notion of choirs towards collective and group singing, about how choirs are often a microcosm of the diversity of our society with all its complexities, how the canon of choral music is being challenged and rethought, how listening itself is evolving, and so on. However, what I did not hear at this Congress, and to be honest, I don't hear much elsewhere in the arts sector, is a recognition and a sense of urgency that we are in a existential climate and nature emergency. And this was troubling to me. For example, when we spoke at the panel on May 19th, I reminded everyone that wildfires were ravaging across Western Canada and parts of Canada, and many of our fellow citizens were migrating to safer ground, and that sadly this pattern will be amplified in the future. But I also said that who better than artists, singers, composers, educators to help society work through these complexities. For example, Professor Adam Kahn from the University of Victoria mentioned at a panel on education that choral music is well suited to the challenges that we face because collective singing is a participative, community-engaging, cooperative, inclusive, and accessible activity. I agree with Professor Khan, and I think we're going to need more choral music activities, more choral music about the ecological crisis as our future unfolds. So here we go. First you'll hear Inuk singer and composer Deantha Edmunds, who will talk about her experience with performance on the theme of ecology and reconciliation. She'll speak for 10 minutes, followed by conductor and choral music director Elise Naccarato, who will share her experience and insights with commissioning and producing choral works about social justice and ecological issues. After Elise's presentations, you'll hear 3 questions from the audience. The first was about the predominance of women in climate change advocacy. Deantha responded to this question. The second intervention is from veteran choral music composer Donald Patriquin, who talked about his experience with choral music and environmental themes.
As a composer and as a proactive composer, singers and so on, we must all get the ecological message out to those who will inherit the earth, and who will live, the children. There has to be much more done there, because they absorb so much. They absorb much more than we do at our age. So let's compose works for children.
And the final question is about programming and audience response to socially engaged choral music, to which both Elise and Deantha responded. Please see links in the episode notes for bios of our panelists. And please note that the sound quality in the hall was not optimal because of reverberation in the room. So please pay close attention and read the transcript if you cannot understand everything. Here we go.
Inuit have been speaking out on the issue of climate change for decades and decades. Inuit Circumpolar Council leaders from Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and Chukotka have delivered speeches on this topic to audiences worldwide to bring Arctic and Inuit perspectives on climate change to the attention of decision makers. Here are some of the facts that are top of my mind. Contaminants make their way to the Arctic and stay there because of the cold climate. They move up the food web and become health and environment concerns for Inuit. Inuit Circumpolar Council is fighting against the rampant spread of forever chemicals and the scourge of plastic pollution. Studies reveal that the Arctic deep sea harbors disproportionately high concentrations of microplastics and ranks among the highest measured globally. We know how microplastics and even smaller particles of nanoplastics can affect local wildlife and human health. The Arctic is warming 3 times as fast as the global average. This is mainly because melting of snow and ice exposes a darker surface and increases the amount of solar energy absorbed in these areas. The Greenland ice sheet is the world's 2nd largest repository of fresh water. As it melts into the ocean and raises sea levels, the effects are felt around the world. I am not a scientist by any means, but I do care deeply about this. I read about what's going on. I pay attention on social media to the accounts that track this. And I try to use my writing, composing, and performing as activism. It is a privilege to have this platform, and I am very grateful for it every day. A few years ago, I made a decision to start using my voice and raising my voice in a different way. And this is one of the ways in which I've changed my work. The path to reconciliation is all about connecting, talking to one another, sharing our stories, and really, really listening to understand each other. It takes time, and change happens slowly. On Friday night, as Claude said, I was honored to perform as a soloist in Ascanonia, a program of indigenous music in indigenous languages by indigenous artists. I shared my Song of the River, which is from my most recent album, Connections. That song is all about how we are all connected in this river of life. It is a song of peace and a gentle reminder that we are all more alike than different. And we need to work together to bring change. Another work of mine is Ang Malukisa. Ang Malukisa means round in Inuktitut. It was commissioned by Mark Fuhr, and it's sung in English and Inuktitut. It's a multi-song cycle that has the theme of rings, the rings that tell the age of a tree, the spiral structure of an igloo, concentric sound rings, and ripples of water. This work comes from a very personal place and speaks to how we relate to one another and our planet. Our treatment of the land, the water, and each other will reverberate throughout the universe for eons. We can all do more to take care of ourselves, one another, and our environment. We need our call to action to resonate, reverberate, and rebound, a legacy left in honor of our descendants. Ang Malukisa is a solo work with strings. We premiered it at the Stratford Summer Music Festival last year, and I performed it with Newfoundland Symphony Orchestra in St. John's in January. We also recorded it then. The album is called A Likeness, and it will be released by Leaf Music in August, and I hope you will check it out. Claude mentioned that yesterday I performed my Song of the Whale with Holy Heart Chamber Choir, led by Robert Colburn, with oboist Caroline Plamondon. This work was commissioned by Dr. Jane Lible at Memorial University School of Music. I wrote the lyrics in English, and I asked an Inuk elder in Nunatsiavut, the ancestral homelands of Labrador Inuit, from where my father came. I asked her to interpret and translate my words into Inuktitut. I wrote the vocal melody and some of the choral harmonies. And a wonderful friend, a musician and composer, Bill Brennan, arranged it and composed the original oboe and English horn part. When I worked with the youth, the teenagers of Holy Heart Chamber Choir, I spoke to them about this piece and what it means to me and where it came from. I told them that this is not just a pretty song that we are singing. It is a call to action. It is an example of truth and reconciliation and how I weave activism into my art. I spoke to them about how activism isn't just standing at the front lines protesting. It is also how we move through this world and how we use our own voice. For those of you who could not attend the concert yesterday, I will give you a little background. As I said, my late father came from Hopedale on the north coast of Labrador in e178, the ancestral homelands of Labrador Inuit. Hopedale's original Inuktitut name is Avituk, the place of whales. The Inuktitut lyrics translate as, "Listen to the whale's song. Let us care more. Carry the song on. Evolve." When I wrote this piece, I was thinking about how whales know so much more than us about the state of the world's water. Ancient knowledge lives within them, and their songs travel. Sound travels faster in water than air, so they know the danger ahead of us. The whales call to us to take better care of the ocean and her creatures. It is taking far too long for us to acknowledge the damage we have done to the world's water and to indigenous people, and to take action. Truth, reconciliation, change. Scientists have discovered that some whale songs actually evolve over time. It is my hope that the choirs who perform this work with me, and all those who hear it, will refuse to let what the whales are saying get lost in the ocean, and will join their song in calling for respect and reciprocity.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elise Naccarato, and I'm the Artistic Director of Myriad Ensemble, and also the Managing Director of Chorus Niagara. So my background is both in the arts and in business collectively, and I work actively in both spheres. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a project that Myriad Ensemble undertook, back in 2019, I guess. A project called Unsung, If the Earth Could Sing, by Katarina Gibbon. And Katarina is our composer in residence at Myriad and a very good friend. We grew up in the Hamilton Children's Choir together. And in 2019, we went for brunch, just as friends, with our poet friend, Lauren Keith. And we were just having brunch, and all good things are conceived over food. And on a napkin, we were just chatting, and we were just chatting about topics and issues that were important to us as young people. And at the time, we were all under the age of 30, now all 30, and saying, what can we do as artists? We have this unique pairing as a conductor, a composer, and a poet. How can we use our voice to advocate for issues that matter to us? So on a napkin, we wrote down that the environmental crisis was an issue that was really important to us. I'm originally from the West Coast. I was born and raised just outside of Vancouver, BC, now living in Burlington, Ontario. And ironically, Katarina was born and raised in Burlington, now living on the West Coast. And Lauren, likewise, was born and raised in Hamilton and now living on the West Coast. So we bring not a holistic, but we do bring a cross-country perspective to it from different perspectives of our childhood and adult lives. And so we were talking about how can we represent the environmental crisis and its effect on Canada in a piece of choral music. And be able to, in our own voice and our own words, express this, and in a way that we felt the singers might too be able to be part of the experience. So we thought, well, let's apply to the Canada Council for a commission.
Oh, Canada Council.
Woohoo! And we thought, let's apply for a commission for 5 to 10 minute work that would speak about the environmental crisis from the voice of the landscapes. And the piece originally was called If the Earth Could Sing, If the Earth Could Sing. And we were very fortunate to receive the grant in February of 2020. So you all know what came in March of 2020. And the entire world changed. And as we navigated that the work too changed, and the scope of the work and the meaning of this work. And the title eventually of Lauren's poems became Unsung. Because we don't often, how can we hear the earth? How can we hear its voice? And this idea that the earth is singing for the first time, and we can be part of giving it voice as a choral, as a choir and as a choral community. So this project evolved from a 5 to 10 minute mini piece into a now 25-minute 5-movement work for cello, upper voice choir, and percussion that not only speaks about the environmental crisis, but adds to the genre of choral music. And that's something that has become important to Katerina and I in our work as conductors and composers and music educators. So that was the beginning of something. And I won't speak too much more about the details of the work because there's very, I think, good session by Katerina, Lauren, and I that you can find on the Podium app, which you will hear from Lauren and Katerina themselves, and I don't want to put words to their ideas and thoughts, so it's best to hear from them. So I'm going to jump right to the rehearsal process. So what happens next? Well, I'm very fortunate that I have 60 singers in front of me, many of whom are here today. And maybe that just shows how proud they are of this work and the voice that they've had in creating it. So we brought it to the rehearsal process and put this in front of them, and I started with the 5th movement, which is titled Glacier, and speaks about the melting of the glaciers. And all of a sudden, the choir was faced with words and texts and stories that they had never encountered. I even remember us sitting in rehearsal Googling, is it crystalline, crystalline? What the heck is that? And it's the small fracture of the glacier that occurs as it melts. And this was a piece of language all of a sudden we had to investigate and we collectively learned about. And it heightens the awareness too for the singers of what is happening. What are the technical terms that are breathing life into the crisis? How do we speak about it in a way that feels educated and feels relevant and feels timely? So we started with this movement called Glacier. It's the hardest of the 5 movements, but I didn't know that at the time because I didn't have the other movements. And we performed it at our winter concert. And my firm belief in programming is that we must have something fun, we must have something that the audience knows and loves, we must have something educational as well. And this was a piece on a Christmas concert or holiday concert that was about the melting of the glaciers. Really? Elise? And yet that was the piece of education that I not only wanted to give to the choir, but give to the 400 people sitting in our audience. Then January came of 2022, and it was time to learn the other 4 movements of this work. And the one we started with next was called Grassland, and it speaks about the prairie region and how birds and bison are all migrating. And it was so powerful, just in the choral harmonies, it's homophonic, it's the only movement that moves together. And the choir all of a sudden understood it. They had gone from the hardest movement, Glacier, to something they understood, and now they became the bison, they became the birds. They had to embody this in their singing and in their understanding, and therefore they had to, along with me, do research about why. Why is this happening? And why is it important that we sing about it in a way that feels authentic to us? And that movement is very special to me personally because we also adopted our newfound choral mascot called Benny the Bison from it. And it sounds like a joke, but Benny he was a crocheted stuffed animal that became a therapy animal. And Benny the Bison would come to choir and would go around to all the singers, and they would hold him and they would hug him. This is an adult upper voice choir. This is not a children's choir. These are 18-year-olds and up. And what it did was, it gave Unsung a new life. Not only now were we speaking about the environmental crisis, but we were speaking now about the crisis inside ourselves. and how those two things are actually not disconnected. And so Benny, for me, became a motif of I could now see how the singers were connecting with the music, how the singers were engaging and struggling in their own lives, and became a very powerful process, a very powerful tool of healing. And Unsung has now been, in fact, we actually have never performed it live yet. We performed Hurricane here at Podium and in our own concert, so the first movement. But all 5 movements can be found in video form online through our YouTube channel. And that was another piece of the project that evolved from its original inception, was the video element. I know Megan has spoke about building partnerships and collaborations. And for many of us that are conductors, we often talk about how do we make choral music new? How do we make it accessible and beyond the soundscape piece of it? And so we decided, let's put video to it. Because why should we just hear about this? Why shouldn't we see it as well? And so we're very fortunate in Myriad to work with a phenomenal video crew, and they embrace the project in its full entirety, and we're just as chaotically creative as we were. And it really brought the 5 movements to life in a very sensitive way. So commissioning, can it be expensive? Yes. Can putting a project together like Unsung be expensive? Yes. Is it worth every penny of investment? Yes. And I highly encourage you, don't shy away. If you're like, man, my choir can't do that because we don't have a penny to spend, talk to others, build connections. And you might just find yourself maybe in a commissioning consortium, maybe doing a piece of music that already exists and engaging with artists that bring their voice to that music that can provide a different educational landscape that you can provide. So I would say continue to stay humble, keep listening and keep learning. And that is how we will use choral music as a way to advocate and change the environmental crisis that we are facing ourselves in.
Not to take note that all of the panelists today are female presenting, and historically, women have been at the forefront of climate change advocacy. And I guess my question is more so, how do you feel your position of power in the current structure that we have to navigate impacts your ability for social change in the choral space?
That's a really great question, and it's a lot to think about. I'm going to speak briefly about another commission I've done. It's going to be premiered in Toronto in June. I'm singing a piece that I put together called Braiding Voices with Amadeus Choir, and it focuses on celebrating women, because women are the life givers. In Inuit culture, women are the fire keepers. They kept the furlik, the crescent-shaped oil lamp, lit while the men were away for long periods of time. The women kept the fire going in so many ways. They cooked over it, they dried their clothes over it, it warmed them, it brought them light, it gave them hope. And so this piece that I wrote, Braiding Voices, involves throat singers who weave in and out throughout the piece. Amadeus Choir will be singing some Hildegard von Bingen chant. And I have written a new section in Inuktitut. I'm also going to be speaking an English poem, and at the end we'll be singing the Bingen chant using the Inuktitut lyrics, all in our own time, because I really wanted to pay tribute to the fact that women really do carry so much And we can do so much. And so to listen up.
It's a very good question, because when we selected the panel, they were all women, and they were all leaders, and it was the right thing to do. I've noticed in my circle, maybe 80% of the leaders are women, whether it's Judy Pearl and Annette Hagover running an organization called Scale. It's an art climate organization that I helped start up. It's, I'm very grateful for those women who work so hard on our path and with us, and it's just leadership there. So, good.
My name is Donald Patrickman. I didn't have to write these, but just get my name now. Like the person who told jokes with numbers. You guys know that one. Before I became a musician, particularly a choral musician, I became a biologist. And with a major I took one of the first university courses in what was called ecology at that time. And my ecological pedigree included people like Dr. Langford, with whom I studied. He was a disciple of Rachel Carson. Who does know who Rachel Carson is? Good. I'm glad that name hasn't died entirely. And her great mentor, I don't think she actually met this person, was a gentleman named, senior moment here, Henry David Thoreau. Now, who knows of Henry David Thoreau? Good. Even more than know of Rachel Carson. Great person. And he lived in Massachusetts, and he was really America's first ecologist. And he saw all this stuff in his own way, everything that's happening. So I got just two things to say, and they're all written down here, so don't take very long. Choral Canada alone accounts for, 50,000 singers, and more than 52,000 of which you are the umbrella.
Altogether, membership-wise, it's about 42,000 singers, but that's just members. So if we're talking about how many people sing in choirs in Canada, it's 3.5 million.
Yeah, great, yes. So my point here is that with all of these people, in a way, I think that Choral Canada can become even more proactive in this whole ecological mess we're in. I think it's really very important, and I'm sure they will. There are so many of you speak to it so eloquently. And I'm just amazed. I think I learned more this afternoon than I might have learned from Dr. Langford. It's remarkable. Second thing I want to say is that as a composer, and as a proactive composer, singers and so on, we must all get the ecological message out to those who will inherit the earth. Now, who are those? The children. There has to be much more done there, because they absorb so much. They absorb much more than we do at our age. So let's compose works for children. I happen to have composed a work, actually it's called Reflections on World Poem. And the other one I wrote with my very good friend who was a Métis, Deantha Edmunds, who's died now, called The Parking Lot Song. And if that's of interest to anybody, but I'm not here to promote that one. So. No, I'm not. I don't have to promote it. That's it. No, that's it. No. Thank you.
Questions to the whole panel, whoever would like to answer. So obviously social issues can be quite polarizing in general. So how do you balance the impact of doing more social cause pieces with the issue itself and maybe alienating audiences that were otherwise followers of your choirs or organizations or work in general? Because obviously you can only have an impact if people listen to your message. So how do you kind of balance those two when either picking social issues to champion or taking a perspective on a social issue?
I'm laughing because two of the questions have come from my choristers. So this answer might already be familiar, but I know with myriad ensembles, something that's really important is balance. It's trying to make the singers who are first off in the choir feel seen and heard, and that I'm balancing pieces that I may only have one singer who identifies with that background, topic, theme, or interest, but that they feel seen and heard, and then they can use that to educate others, along with making sure that the concert is balanced. And there's always something that ends on a hopeful note, something that leaves the audience with that, there's that piece of education that may come in the middle, that will always come in the middle, and that they're leaving, that they've learned something and they walk away inspired to do something about it. And that changes from concert to concert, theme to theme. I think it's really important that there's that balance and that we're making connections with our audience in a way that feels authentic and true to not only to the choir's identity, but to my identity personally as a conductor. And I am not representative of everybody, but I can do my bit to educate myself through those that are in my circles, those who maybe are not in my circles that I might want to connect with now, you know, like meeting different people, and making sure that I'm using our voice as a choir and my voice personally to share knowledge and wisdom with those who are listening to our music and connected to the choir in some way.
I spent decades primarily as a teacher of young children and teenagers, piano and voice and preschool and classroom music. And it's only in the past 5 years that I decided to, as I said earlier, use my voice in a different way. And I am sure most of it comes from age and life experience, but I decided that I wanted to create work that comes from my heart. I don't think about how people are going to receive it. I don't write it. Genuinely, I don't say, I need this message. I really try to open up and write from a very personal place about the things that matter the most to me. And so there's a song I've written called Legacy, which some of you may have heard at Podium a couple of years ago in Toronto, that I sang with Shallow Youth Choir and the Newfoundland Deaf Choir. And it is to honor and uplift the voices of the thousands and thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks. And that song has such a life now. There are so many different arrangements of it. I've collaborated with choirs across the country on it. I wrote about it in a book that's going to be published soon, Bart. And anyway, so I write about the things that I need to write about for my own sake. And when I'm asked to write about something, it has to be something I genuinely care about and get excited to work on. So, and I think that shows in my work, and it's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to share that.